Coming up, 6 years after the referendum, and I'm doing yet another video about Brexit. Well, yes, the rock was thrown into the pond in 2016, and yet the ripples continue to increase in size, and the unintended consequences are still playing out today. Many of these consequences were of course predicted by the pro-Remain lobby, but dismissed as Project Fear by a Leave campaign stoked with Russian money and offshore oligarchs. And I'm not talking about just the headline-grabbing Northern Ireland Protocol and the breakup of the United Kingdom itself. OK, I can't overstress the massive impact that will have on the British and Irish states, but nevertheless, the protocol is still only one ripple on the pond. The economic and political ramifications of leaving the EU continue to manifest, and I thought this week I'd give a quick overview of where we're at. Stay tuned. If you enjoy these videos, please help me out by liking, subscribing and hit the bell for notifications of new videos every Saturday. We were told by the Vote Leave lobby that when we left the EU, things were going to carry on pretty much as they were. At that time, they told us that freedom of movement, leaving the single market, leaving the customs union, these weren't even on the table. Project Fear! Don't be so ridiculous! There wouldn't be any trade barriers with the EU, as they need us more than we need them. The German automotive industry, blah blah blah. This portrayal of the softest of soft Brexits turned out to be unicorns crapping out rainbows. It was clear that everything was going to be different after Brexit. I say after Brexit, but because of the belligerence of the Theresa May government, which was then ramped up to 11 by the Johnson administration with the addition of incompetence and corruption, Brexit began to impact the UK economy well before we'd even left the EU. Leading economist John Springford of the Centre for European Reform came up with a scientific way of measuring the economic impact of Brexit. What he did was he came up with a basket of other economies that matched the UK's performance historically and called that the Doppelganger UK. He then tracked the Doppelganger UK and compared it with the actual performance of the actual UK, both during the Brexiting process and post-Brexit. Here on this chart, you can see the impact of leaving the single market and customs union on UK trade up to October last year, the latest figures available. This chart shows a 15.7% hit in goods trade. In other words, £12.6 billion of damage caused by Brexit in that month alone. We're talking in the ballpark of £150 billion a year in trade as a cost of Brexit, both now and for the foreseeable future. I don't remember reading that on the side of a bus. In fact, the government's own Office of Budget Responsibility tells us that to date, we've only as yet felt 20% of the long-term impact of Brexit under the deal that Johnson, Frost, Gove and the rest of the cabal were so proud of at the time, but are now saying they signed under duress, with the dimwit Truss threatening to tear up the Northern Ireland Protocol. Interestingly, the economists at UK Interchanging Europe have already run the figures on what would happen if dim Lizzie Truss actually carried through her threats, even as she faces pressure from the United States of America congressmen who've flown into Britain this week to try to dissuade her. And the European Union negotiators have tried to explain the dire consequences to her of this action. Unfortunately, Liz cut-and-paste Truss either doesn't care or more likely just doesn't understand that should she put this into action, it would probably mean the end of the withdrawal agreement and would dump the UK back into the no-deal situation that we only narrowly avoided at the time we Brexited. Here's the chart that the economists at UK Interchanging Europe have prepared based on best forecasts over the next 10 years. The red bars show you the current situation under the current Brexit deal. The bars in blue show you how much worse it would be with the no-deal scenario that dim Lizzie seems intent on manifesting. In 10 years' time, with the current Brexit deal, the average UK citizen will be 6% worse off compared to if the UK had stayed in Europe. With a no-deal scenario, that'd be an additional 2% hit, meaning we'd all be 8% worse off on average. UK exports to the EU will already be 36% lower compared to EU membership, and that would become a 49% reduction with a no-deal scenario. And total UK trade, which includes all those pathetic one-sided trade deals given away by trusts to small economies on the other side of the world, total UK trade is already forecast to reduce by 13% in 10 years' time. And that would fall to a 17% hit given a no-deal situation. This shows the falsity of trusts arguing that by signing loads of trade deals, we will somehow compensate for the economic impacts of leaving the European Union. Trade volumes are very, very closely linked to geography. Throughout the world, countries trade more with other countries that are near to them. The wonderful trust trade deal with New Zealand, for example, the one that our farmers and many others are up in arms about because it's so one-sided. That deal is not going to provide the same level of car manufacturing arrangements we have with BMW, for example, for fairly obvious reasons. A, New Zealand doesn't have a BMW or anything like that, and B, it's the other side of the world. Now, although these trade figures are horrendous and very significant, how the Brexiters get away with it is that these figures, dire as they are, don't mean the British economy will necessarily shrink. There may well be growth over the next 10 years. But the point is, that growth will be nowhere near what it would have been if we were within the EU. People just may not realise it because it's comparing where we are to where we should have been. So in that sense, it's a sort of hidden cost. But that doesn't mean it won't have a significant impact on people's lives. There's a growing belief that because the Northern Ireland Protocol, to all intents and purposes, keeps Northern Ireland within the EU, and because the Northern Ireland economy is performing spectacularly better than the British economy, it's providing a glaring demonstration of how much better off Britain would be within the EU. So the Johnson government have to put a stop to that by trashing the international treaty they only signed up to a couple of years ago and going back on their word. This is how far this country has descended under Boris Johnson. Now, what about regulatory freedom? That was meant to be the real reason for Brexit, wasn't it? Well, the real reason, as we all know now, was that the rich and powerful with their offshore tax-free investments wanted to make damn sure they weren't caught by the proposed EU clampdown on offshore tax avoidance strategies. But let's run with the cover story about regulation, that the point of Brexit was to free us from the EU's over-regulation, the so-called bureaucratic nightmare of the European Union. Well, it turns out there is a whole swathe of areas in which we're regulating even more than we were before Brexit. So much for the Britannia Unchained mob of rampant deregulators, Truss, Patel, Kwarteng, Raab. The reality is extremely different now that they're part of the UKIP-like, out-of-control Brexit government of Boris Johnson. Oh, and immigration. That was the other reason for Brexit, wasn't it? We've run out of room, they cried, exemplified by the Brexit voter who said that the reason he voted to leave the EU was that there were too many brown faces on the checkout desks at his local Tesco's. Quite what the connection there was puzzled us all, but the reality is that the figures on immigration since leaving the EU have been quite remarkable. There has been a massive increase in the levels of immigration from non-EU countries, and large numbers of EU citizens leaving Brexit Britain. And what I've found the most interesting thing, whether because of the tragedy in Ukraine or just the general public coming to a realisation that they aren't so filled with the same hate and xenophobia that they see demonstrated by the likes of Priti Patel and Nigel Farage, is that public opinion continues to become ever more positive about the cultural and economic impact of immigration. Suddenly, immigration has dropped off the front pages of the right-wing rags as they realise it's no longer selling papers. I do suspect, though, that it's where immigration is happening post-Brexit that is making the difference. Small towns in Brexit land have lost their large communities of Eastern Europeans who used to do the jobs that the native Brits didn't want to do. Now, the crops may be rotting in the fields, but the EU workers have gone, so the issue of immigration has disappeared in those places. The immigration we're now seeing is mainly in the highly skilled professions, taking jobs that British workers want to do, but are now facing increasing competition for. And they're mainly into urban areas where there is already a diverse, younger and more liberal population who already saw immigration as a good thing before Brexit. By the way, the influx of highly skilled, hard-working immigrants into urban areas of the country, mainly in the south, that's only adding to regional inequality and is another hole beneath the waterline for the government's so-called levelling up policy, the Poundland equivalent that is laughably meant to replace the old EU regional funding on a shoestring budget. Look, this video is already turning out to be much longer than most of the videos I post on the channel, so I will stop soon. But before I do, I wanted to add this. It'll be interesting to see as this current regime struggles on with the cost of leaving crisis, as I like to call it, how the battles within the Tory party are going to play out. Because the good news is, there will be battles during the run-up to the next general election. Whilst there are a number of traditional small-state Thatcherites, like the man who has become a parody of himself, John Redwood, and Liz Truss is another example, don't forget that there's also a massive group of former Red Wall Tories who want to keep their constituents happy by spending public funds in these poorer areas of the country. So there's a conflict right there between that new intake of Tory MPs and the old guard. In addition to that, I just wanted to say as well that Brexit isn't just about economics. The culture wars have largely been invented by the right-wing Tories and their friends in the press and the media. But Brexit is also a part, or has become a part, of those culture wars. Brexit is based on the same lies, dishonesty and xenophobia. The liars and the lied to. To paraphrase Will Self, not all Brexit voters were racists and xenophobes, but all racists and xenophobes certainly voted for Brexit. The so-called culture wars arise from this particular group, harking back to a time when we all knew our place, when we all worshipped the Queen, when patriotism meant an unquestioning acceptance of what the government told us, when the UK was much whiter than it is now, and even to echoes of when Britannia ruled the waves instead of now when Britannia is waving the rules when it comes to the unwritten constitution and international treaties. To that extent, Brexit has become not just an economic disaster, but an embodiment of these dishonest culture wars.